Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Tony Sirianni podcast. I am thrilled to have my friend John Peluso, who is Executive VP and Partner at Thurston Capital. Thank you for being here, John.
Hey, my pleasure, Tony. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, I guess for those who don't know, let's just a little bit just talk about your background, how you ended up at Thurston, which I think is interesting, and I know a lot of folks know you from your past, but just for the new folks.
Yeah, happy to. 30 plus years at a wirehouse, really always within that environment, kind of on the independent cutting edge.
Which is interesting though, because that was the whole, there was a big battle between independents and wires, and you were threading that needle that whole time.
Yeah, it was really interesting because when you think back on it, 20 some years ago, the industry had not fully embraced the independent model. And
Absolutely not. Yeah.
so, it was like, I remember the days where I'd have to describe to someone and explain to them what a 1099 was.
Totally. Yeah, no, totally. It was education was the thing, because I remember that, with me starting it, you had to educate advisors as to what this was.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that, John, is that I think back then, just the way you're talking, there was a battle between the wires and independents, and it was structural. Like you said, it was 1099 versus W-2. It was what is an RIA and a fee versus commission. And we had this structural battle. And it ultimately turned, I think, to everybody's benefit, more or less, into a battle of ideas. It was more like, what is the ethos? What do you believe in? And then you have now in that group of firms that are sort of versus the old banking way of doing things, you've got everybody, including, Wells Fargo, including Stifel, including, Northwestern. I mean, all these guys who sort of agree on this basic ethos. It's very different today from what it was then.
Yeah, it was this philosophical issue, in my view, of kind of corporate control
Yeah.
versus embracing advisor autonomy, right? That was at the core of it 25 years ago. And to be honest with you, there's still some of that exists today in the industry. One of the things that I saw early on was, that obviously identifying the trend to independence, if you had your eyes open in the early 2000s, you would have seen this, but many people kind of wanted to defend the status quo.
Of course.
But one of the things I saw happening was that it was kind of these two lanes to independence, and I call it big I and little I. And, the big I independence was the rise of the independent firm.
Yeah.
And a lot of that came through M&A and aggressive recruiting, but these independent firms became dominant within the industry. And then the second I is little I, and that's just someone breaking away and going independent on their own, right? And they're two very different things, but both of those trends have continued to today.
I think, what's interesting is that you say that, is that as far as the big guy goes, and you said earlier you had to educate, right? So you have a lot of guys who were leaving wirehouses that fancied themselves entrepreneurs, but when it come down to it, they really weren't. They didn't want to do the real estate and the accounting and the compliance and all that stuff. You know what I mean? So they needed a firm. So these firms, the big guy firms, they got together and built themselves up out of necessity, because that was what was being asked.
Yeah. I mean, I remember asking, people would always say to me, advisors would say, it's too good to be true what you're telling me, John. And I said, well, hold on a second. And this is about going independent. I said, but remember, you got to ask yourself something before you make this leap, is that, do you want to be a business owner? Do you want that accountability of all the things that come with being independent? And as you said, many of them were like, that would give them a pause. So the big I firms tried to build that infrastructure to make that part going independent easier.
Yeah, yeah. And so you see, today you see, I think that's what drove the movement, John, right? That the firms were created to ease these pressures, and guys voted with their feet for where they wanted to be. And today I see that those changes being driven by equity and financing and things like that, because that seems to be like one of the most popular avenues that advisors want to pursue, right? So they're voting with their feet, but it's really that sort of financing thing that's driving the structure of firms today, right? And you guys have built something that's very cool, I think, and has its own structure and its own, value to advisors. So let's talk a little bit about that. And by the way, not just make this the longest non-question in the world. But I think the wirehouses were the bad guys in the beginning of this battle, right? And you had to walk a fine line between that. And then, but today there's notions that some of this PE may not be good, right? So there are good guys and bad guys in PE. So that's like the new villains, right? The advisors who are unaware of stuff are challenged in some way.
Yeah, I mean that's a big question.
I think all
And
that's
let me
a
try,
comment.
I'll
Unpack it
try
a little bit.
to I'll try to see if I can
Well, it's
address it.
more like,
See,
where you guys are and where you're seeing,
yeah,
what are you seeing sort of now in this new
yeah.
changing?
So, I mean, look, there's no doubt that, the economics and money are always vitally important to any type of, transaction or discussion with an advisor. But I like to think about that economics is what opens the door, right? It allows you to actually have a conversation. And I do think things are shifting from defining success solely in terms of AUM and T12, which is
Yeah.
really what things were all about. And as you mentioned, equity has become very important. That's something that was rarely talked about 20 years ago. Like,
No,
I mean,
if
it,
it's like when you ask the guys when I got in this business 30 years ago, what's your assets under management? They go, what?
yeah,
No idea. Yeah.
yeah, and it was like a phantom concept that you could go independent and have this asset that sat as part of your balance sheet. Like they didn't understand that. Today, that's a driver, as you mentioned, right? Building equity, having a sustainable enterprise value is something that advisors are looking for, and it's really their long-term goal at this point in time. And so I agree with you. Equity is key, not only in their individual practice, which the big I firms can help drive that value,
Yeah.
but also in the little I practice, right? Or I mean, not little I, but I mean in the big I helping the little I, but
Yeah.
also being able to participate in the broader enterprise equity, which we do via tag along rights, right?
Yeah.
And that's not like an innovative concept, but we do execute upon that. But equity is only one component, right? You got to have the deal. You got to
I would
have
just, yeah, in that scenario that you just said, right, where
yeah.
you do it, the question starts to become, well, who's in charge of the place? So you want a guy with 40 years experience in the business who knows what he's doing, that's been building these things. I mean, it builds confidence when if you are going to count on the partners to drive the equity, you better have good partners, or at least to have guys with a good plan.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, no doubt. I mean, that's the whole. You'd mentioned PE earlier, and it's like you need to know what the cap table looks like. Like, who's making decisions, day in and day out. And look, there's nothing wrong with PE. PE flushed a ton of capital into our space. It's been, I think, overall, it's been really good for our space with, providing that growth capital, increasing firm valuations. You've seen larger national platforms that can compete with the traditional horses. Operational sophistication. I mean, a lot of things they brought into the industry. Now, I do, so there's positives and negatives, right? So on the positives, PE maybe better resources, greater scale, and expanded capabilities. But on the other side of that are some challenges. The cultural integration, maintaining personalized service, and the potential loss of entrepreneurial spirit. So those are things that at Thurston Capital, that's what we thrive in, right? I mean, that we're a small firm that's agile. And I've seen the big firms and experienced that, and there's value in all the things that they do, but kind of contrary to how we've positioned ourselves in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think you're seeing there's a little cottage industry today. You said know what the cap table is. Know what a cap table is. I think some advisors are just completely they're not thinking. They like the CEO. They shake hands. Okay, this sounds good. Or they get a hypothetical that has all these incredible numbers on it, and it's like, oh, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think that. Between the good and the bad guys, you got to find the right partner, and that's what I think is driving exactly what you talked about. Is kind of what's driving a lot of the movement now. People are trying to find their spot in there. They recognize, and even as you said before, that they fancy themselves entrepreneurs, but they don't want to find the real estate, pay the taxes, and do all that stuff. Same thing with the equity. They get it, but they don't want to start dealing with M&A firms and all. They got a book to run, so let somebody else, let the partners do it. I think it's the kind of same mentality that's driving that.
Yeah, I mean, look, and we talk a lot about that. I mean, that's like a vital point, but it's only one of like what I would consider 4 points that you need to evaluate when you're trying to make a move. Like equity is important, but what's my payout? What's the deal? And what kind of platform am I going to be operating on to be able to take care of my clients? And
Yeah.
the combination of those four things, and it's not always easy to ascertain, what that combination is, but that's the force multiplier that if you can find the right match on those 4 points, then you're generally starting to narrow the path of your choices.
Yeah, and that's driving enterprise value in a positive
Yeah,
way.
I mean, look, at the end of the day, I think advisors are looking for a firm that has some stability and a good track record. They're looking for strong leadership, and they want a clear vision of the future. Like, where are you going? What are we doing? How do we ultimately monetize the business? And that's what we're trying to help independent advisors do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about you talked about the fact that the firm is the place where guys are, I don't want to do the leases. I don't want to do this. I don't want to worry about M&A. I want somebody to do it. The other thing that's creating a lot of anxiety is AI. And that's another, and you said your firm's nimble and small, the size of the firm. That's something else that you really want competent people working on. So if you're a standalone RIA, it's anxiety. I'm worried about regulation with AI.
Yeah.
Where's going to go with that, right? So what are you guys doing? How are you addressing it, and how are you thinking about it? And if you were an advisor looking for a firm, what kind of things would you be looking for? Because I think AI
Yeah.
is a driver as well.
No, I 100% agree. Look, I mean, my view on AI is that it creates scale without human capital, right? So
Right.
it's the great equalizer. The amount of hours that it takes to do X is greatly reduced with AI, right? So that brings scale to smaller firms now,
Yeah.
where we're competing at a completely different level because of AI and what AI is going to do. I think, of course, it drives productivity gains and reduces administrative work. We'll all agree to that. But you asked me, what are we doing at Thurston? First, we're embracing it, right? I mean, I would say that that's step one. We're fully embracing AI and what we think it can do to help our advisors. So, we're spending our own money. We're implementing applications for meeting notes,
And
for summaries and CRM.
so do you think at that level, right? So a firm has enough money to make sure you've got sort of the basics. But this is changing so fast. It's to my way of thinking, I don't know that I'd want to spend $400 million on an AI thing today when tomorrow it's going to be something different, right? You want to be able to pull from the market, have enough capital to reach out there and get it for everybody and keep current, right? I mean, there's a size issue there that benefits maybe that mid-sized firm. I don't know.
I'd say even a small firm, right? I
Yeah.
mean, the beautiful thing about, at a small firm is the speed and control that you can operate with, as opposed to a massive scaled organization where, things just take a long time to get implemented because of the budgeting process and the committees and everything that's involved at a large firm in order to implement something. So at a small firm like at Thurston, for example, I mentioned earlier we're agile, but at the end of the day, my partners and I can meet. We can decide we need something. We can look at what's available in the fintech space and in the AI world. We do our due diligence on it. We enter into an engagement and we implement it into the system. And because of our size, it doesn't cost $400 million to do that. Like I had a guy in IT one time. He came into the big firm I was working at. He'd come from a small firm, and we were trying to get something done, and it was a minor little thing. And the big firm was saying, well, it's going to cost $100,000. And this guy looked at me and he goes, that's unbelievable. He goes, $100,000 in the real world actually gets a lot done. So it's just a small
Yeah.
example that within a big firm, Just to even make a tiny switch cost a ton of money. And in a small firm, $100,000 can get you a long way.
Yeah, yeah. And well, so look, beyond technology and capital, right? I know uh, you've been sort of a team whisperer your whole career, working with advisors. I know you like to be in the field. What are you thinking about that sort of the soft skills that you think a, a team really needs going into this, yeah, and dealing with AI and ownership and all those things? What are the sort of the skill sets you think an advisor needs to have for going into the 2020s here, mid 2020s?
Um, well, I mean, I'm a big believer in that. The human element of advice will always win out, at least in my lifetime. I can't imagine things will evolve that fast. The wealth management space is fundamentally about trust, right? So advisors that can demonstrate and have relationships with their clients based around trustworthiness is really, I think, still the secret sauce. It was 30 years ago, and I still believe that today. This technology has come into the space, and I think it actually enhances the ability for an advisor to demonstrate their trustworthiness. So,
And provide service, provide
absolutely,
high quality service. I mean, if you get $5 million, you get stuck on a call with somebody from another country that says that they can't tell you exactly. You want to call your advisor's office where the assistant who knows you answers the phone and can get what you want done. It's this feeling of comfort, that's you really don't want to you don't want Stephen Hawking voice telling you what to do.
yeah, 100%. Look, you and I know this, Tony. The ultimate differentiator is relationships, right? I
Yeah.
mean, think about it. Every single day that I get up and come to the office, I mean, the most important thing that I do is build or enhance a relationship. I mean, that's simple, right? It's not. We do a lot of other stuff, but the most impactful things that I do every day, it deals with relationships of people.
No question about it. Well, believe it or not, we're at 20 minutes already, but when you look at what's ahead, we talked a little bit about AI, we're seeing what
Mhm.
equity is doing and all that, and relationships. Where do you see the industry, headed, given all that? And
Yeah.
given what's going on today, are we at a high in terms of valuations? Is this stuff going to level off? Or is it just, have we positioned ourselves where we just kind of continue?
Well, I can't predict the future on valuations and what happens there because if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have been wrong.
Me too.
So I'm very surprised at where we sit today, and I'm hopeful that that it continues, um, or at least holds steady. But look, that I think from the future, I'm optimistic because the demand for trusted advice is still there.
Mhm.
I think financial complexity will continue to be a part of all families' lives. Um, and so, and the whole rise in this AI and other technologies, they'll help create efficiencies and help independent firms and advisors be able to deal with those to provide the service that clients want. The pace of change creates opportunity. Right?
It
I'm going
does.
to say that again. The pace of change creates opportunity. The faster things are going, the more opportunity there is in the marketplace. Every major shift in the market produces new business models and new growth areas. And so that's why I'm so optimistic is that we're small enough and agile enough that if whatever comes, we're going to deal with it, right? We'll embrace it like we're embracing AI, and we will full front go after it and continue to compete whatever the markets bring us.
And by the way, you're a small firm, but you're also well capitalized.
Mhm.
You're able to. That's a difference. That's a differentiator too.
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, thank you, John, for being here. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted me to ask you? Because we
No,
can always do this again. I appreciate the
yeah,
I appreciate the time and your point of view. Thanks.
yeah, it's always my pleasure, Tony. It's I always enjoy talking to an industry insider like you, and I always learn something from you, and you make me better.
I appreciate that. Thanks, bud.